Appamada's programs and facilities are supported through your generosity. Your support really does make a huge difference. You'll find a link for contributions on the website at appamada.org/contribute. Thank you so much.
Good morning, good day. It's so good to be together, and thank you for coming this morning. This morning's talk is entitled Light After Darkness, and I want to give many bows to my buddies, my spiritual buddies in Council 2, Anne and Joel and Q and Darcy, who gave me good counsel on the topic today. So anything that went well, I want to share the merit with them, and anything that does not go well is entirely me. So first off, a warning. I started quilting after really a lifetime of wanting to sew and quilt in the fall. And so this talk is sort of like a quilt. It's made out of a bunch of pieces, scraps, that hopefully will make a hole and make something useful like a blanket. And so that is its structure. Part of it is me telling you about my life in a personal way. And then part of it is completely long quotes from John Tarrant's 1998 book, The Light Inside the Darkness, Zen, Soul, and Spiritual Life. Which this past week, Nate and I had coffee, and we both basically said that at some point Flint suggested we read this book, and it made its way into our homes and onto our shelves, but then lived there for some completely undetermined number of years, until such time that its use and its medicine was desperately needed. So may you also benefit in that way. And though I am thinking about, or I'm going to be speaking specifically about my personal experience of grief the past 6 months, I want to include all forms of grief, grieving wars and violence, powerlessness, disconnection, climate crisis, change, and longing. So all flavors of grief are welcome. And I will be reading a little bit more than I would like, again, mostly because of the John Tarrant quotes. So I thought I was the sort of person who could sense things, like hear it before a twig snaps. I am not. I spent that day, a Friday before Christmas, with a friend reviewing the past year and planning the new one. We met in her office, surrounded by Tibetan thangkas, paintings of graceful Buddhas in gold and green and blue. A candle burned. We ate salads. Markers and papers littered the rug. When our time together was done, she offered me a box of fabric because she no longer needed it, and one of my highs that I had shared with her this past year was sewing my first quilt. So I thanked her and put this very large box, very heavy box of fabric into the trunk of my car. Early that morning, in the winter darkness, by a silent red stream in Oklahoma, he died. He was 21. John Tarrant writes, "Beside or inside the life we lead every day is another life." I sunk into the kitchen door frame. My husband, Jim, joined me, our knees touching. I held the phone up between us, the familiar voice saying calmly, "We lost him." That's how my other life began almost 6 months ago. A voice inside kept going back to that moment. He's lost? Well, let's go find him. I imagined everyone who loved him linking arms in their winter jackets and walking the dead gold fields, under that bitter sky. John Tarrant again. The journey into a life of awareness begins for most of us in a moment of helplessness. Descending, we leave behind the way we were. The next morning, a Saturday, I dragged the heavy box into my house. It gave me something to do. I sorted the fabric like I used to unfold and refold my son's tiny clothes when I was pregnant. I put the dark fabric aside, blacks mostly, but also purples, blues, grays. There were no solids, all patterns. Japanese willows, a scrap of bare winter trees, a hank of a flying goose. A week later, we drove 7 hours to Oklahoma to be with our grieving family, and I brought my scissors, a ruler, and the bag of fabric. The house we rented was broken. Its window, heater, and dishwasher. But the dining room table was long, and on it I cut strips of fabric in the morning before we went to join my family. When our innocence is gone and the descent has become irrevocable, the mind becomes for a while very open. This inner fluidity arises from the ordeal of our suffering, which strips away our usual ways of dealing with the world. This is the inner transitional space of initiation. When we enter it, we move from being victims of fate to being pilgrims on a path. We move temporarily from the center to the margins of life. It was bitterly cold outside. We had bonfires at sunset, and during the day lit a fire in the wood burner. I remembered the last time I was there in October, which happened to be the first fire of the season in the wood burner. I watched him bend his long legs to wipe the soot from the winter before from the glass. Then he set the newspaper and wood on fire and fastened the door. The glass is still clear, but where is he? At first, we have to stay with our suffering without hope of change. Despair is a time of waiting, a paralysis, of non-time. Despair is the point where the descent slows, where we enter the darkness proper, in which we are not really falling, but drifting. In the abyss, we approach the heart of the night. Innocence has departed. The images that sustained us or confined us have been broken. The way of life, the compromises and pleasures that we trusted to see us through have vanished, and we have fallen into the thickest confusion. On the drive home, I was in the back seat, sewing short strips of cloth into longer ones. It was Christmas Day. For 7 hours, my entire world was the thread, the needle, and the fabric in my hands. It was dark, and I knew we had no food in the house. Christmas, nothing was open. I knew this, but I did nothing about it. Then a friend texted she had extra food from the holiday meal she fixed for her family. She brought it by for us. It was delicious. When someone is in hell and they cannot understand the reason, all we can give them is the kindness of our attention and our sorrow and the telling of their story. Yet as we continue to be immersed in night and the obstinacy of the ground grows more evident and undeniable, it loses its repulsive quality. I'm going to read that again because John Tarrant is he's so wacky straight on. Yet, as we continue to be immersed in night and the obstinacy of the ground grows more evident, like it's not changing, and undeniable, it loses its repulsive quality. And then he includes a poem by the Zen poet Gary Snyder. It's very short. Here's the whole poem. No one loves rock, yet we are here. No one loves rock, yet we are here. Gary Snyder. Tarrant continues, the griefs of life beg attention. They are orphans. They want to be loved. They hold out their small hands, which grow larger and more substantial when we take them. Every morning, instead of meditating, I lit the candle by his picture and sat in the chair by the light with my coffee and my bag of fabric, sewing 21 strips, each 4 feet long. I called it my grief quilt. I had no plans for it other than I just needed to sew. We don't address directly everything we want changed. Instead, we wait with the dilemma that life has given us and let the world take care of itself for a while. Sewing by hand, I listened to the growing playlist I made to connect with my dear lost one. Songs he nimbly played on guitar. The song he taught me to play poorly. Drum songs by the indigenous Creek tribe. Happy songs and sad songs that made me think of him and my grief. I snipped the thread, peered at the hole in the needle, stitched, nodded, snipped, repeated, listened, and I cried over and over. There are tools of transformation, Tarrant writes. In meditation, we repeat ourselves day after day, coming back to stillness and the breath again and again. Common events, like having breakfast together, accumulate significance. Repetition teaches us that the things we do are not confined to their practical value. Bowing, or even lifting a fork from a plate, makes us aware that simple acts share a common timelessness with the sound of the spring wind and of the branches banging on the gutters. We meet something greater than ourselves, beyond all we hold important. When we are utterly ready for it, this vastness is no longer frightening, but comforting. It is so far from the common experiences of life that it seems to hold nothing at all. To be a great nothing, and that is the Buddhist name for it, emptiness. I want to protect my loved ones, so I'm skimming over a lot of details. But know that every conversation has tears. When my father died, most of us did not cry that much, though we missed him dearly, and still do sometimes. But now we break down in the middle of a hiking trail, fixing dinner, and watching TV or listening to music. Everyone has a therapist. It is hell and then worse. For me, there is my grief at losing my favorite person, which he was. But worse is seeing the ones I love suffer and knowing all I can offer them is my presence. And mostly my presence is absence, interrupted by almost daily texts and weekly phone calls. I trained for 2 years in chaplaincy, which is being with suffering, including dying, and then 6 months of training in grief tending. I thought I knew something. I don't know anything. And then from Tarrant, he quotes a Chinese writer, teacher I'm not familiar with, Wumen Hukai, Japanese, who says, within nothingness, there is a road. Within nothingness, there is a road. If you think that you will hurt me by mentioning my loss, you cannot. Every breath is an expression of my longing. Every moment he is not on this planet somewhere in the human body we loved is present inside me. Grief doesn't have a timeline, it is a road. The stillness of meditation can become so profound that it takes us back before our personal history, before our ancestors made their long journeys across continents and through caves and into the dream that made the world. We find ourselves in vast space. All about, there is nothing. Just as if we stepped out into the tundra in winter. Our equanimity is large, impersonal, unruffled. The bottom drops out of our lives, and the transparence of the world is revealed. At such a moment, there is nothing to be done, and this nothing has to be enough. And from Tarrant, a poem by the Zen poet Aesop. How lovely, through the torn paper screen, the Milky Way. How lovely, through the torn paper screen, the Milky Way. We lose our talent for being comforted by outer things, the gleam of the new car, the admiration of our peers. We grow more bare, more passionately poor. That is how we arrive, shivering and naked at the winter place. Then we feel something let go. And then Tarrant very briefly quotes, without much of a story around it, this. A question that a Chinese pilgrim asked his or her, we'll be generous, his or her teacher 1,000 years ago. I am pecking from inside. Won't you peck from the outside? I am pecking from inside. Won't you peck from the outside? And Tarrant continues. There is a core contradiction between the forceful impression of emptiness, the feeling that there is nothing at all that has absolute existence, and the equally forceful impression of the singularity and beauty of each thing. In March, his dearest friend visited Austin to hear her favorite band. She is 21, like he was. After breakfast, I invite her into my bedroom to show her something. The quilt has come together, all by hand. It's 4 feet square, strips of fabric going from dark to light. I did not know who or why I was making this grief quilt. I never intended to keep it. I sewed in order to breathe and to be with grief. I did not care about the outcome. She loves it. I'm not quite finished, so I tell her I will send it to her soon. Compassion for others is born of our own experience of suffering. It first appears at midnight, when suffering has run the self-absorption out of us and broken down the boundaries that enclose us. We learn to love, to care for the anguish of others. Now, at noon, the situation is not desperate or shocking. Nothing is forced. Hearing the news that we have the same last names as the blowing grass, the glowworms in the cave made by the roots of the upturned tree, and the galaxies living and dying in their vast cycles. Compassion rises like the evening breeze, a natural feature of our seasons. The selfish emotions give us pain, constrict the breathing, but our feeling for others is weightless and old. We recognize the other, our original links to all life. Love comes out of the emptiness. Gradually, love draws us into the world again. I am desperate to see and hold my loved ones. I know that every change in their routine brings pain, even if the change is their loved ones visiting. So I am patient. In May, we are invited. The house we rent this time is cozy and simple and beautiful. There are blankets and pillows everywhere in this house, and I sleep barricaded with them. It is spring. We all agree we hate spring. We hate beauty and hope and wonder. Yet, the dry, dead fields have turned electric green. The sky is vast with blue. The sun shines warmly. We sit on the porch and eat and talk and cry. Sometimes I excuse myself to go sob in his bedroom. There, the books he was reading are on the shelf by his bed. A painting I sent him is on the wall. His plants are a little jungle in the window. His mother takes care of them. We find that life returns to us, the more breathtaking since less. Let me start that over. It's such a great sentence from Tarrant. We find that life returns to us, the more breathtaking, since less of our small selves is painted upon it. Life returns to us, more breathtaking, because less of our small selves is painted upon it. During this time, it is my husband's and my wedding anniversary. We planned a trip to Belize, a reward, originally for 30 years of marriage, but now it's just for getting through the last few months. One day we visit Zunantunik, ruins of the Mayan civilization. As our Mayan guide, Victor, drives us through the hills of Belize, I experience motion sickness for the first time. Let me say, it is a bad feeling. Fellow travelers give me pills and a personal fan and save my life. I change seats and stare at the ragged green horizon. As we approach the site, which I know is sacred to Victor, I hear him quietly chanting in Mayan, along with a recording. Then out of this magical chant arises the actual song he put on the radio and is singing quietly with. It's Elvis Presley singing, "I can't help falling in love with you." To climb steep stone steps, the ruins, you must bow. Literally, the idea was that you would be bowing to the ruler, but of course I thought of our bowing. At the top of the pyramid, Victor points out all around green, hilly, jungly landscape and explains that these hills are all more Mayan ruins. They're everywhere, all over Belize and I guess Guatemala and Mexico. And imagine if you knew that every hillside you passed was the home of your ancestors. And then a little Basho poem. Summer grass, dreams of the warriors under the hill. Summer grass, dreams of the warriors under the hill. We are nearly to the end of today's talk. I wrote this in my office, which is a tiny house in my backyard. Except since January, it's been where my 27-year-old son has been living. In the aftermath of taking time off to grieve, my son lost his job and his apartment. It has been good for us three to live and grieve together. It has also been hard at times to share space when we are all at our worst. So we took an online nonviolent communication class, which I cannot recommend highly enough. So we can express our needs and our requests without hurting each other. My son left for Japan 3 days ago. Ever since COVID put off his plans, he's been wanting to travel and see a friend in Vietnam. So I'm back in my office, yet I am not entirely alone there. On the rafters above me sits my son's small, semi-feral black cat named T'Challa. Her golden eyes glare down at me from the rafters. I wish I could text my lost one a photo of her. The cat's fear and dramatic posture would bring forward compassion in him and also laughter. And if he were here, he was so gentle and patient, he could probably coax her down. But my son gave me clear instructions. Feed her and ignore her, and she will eventually come to you. So the last quote from Tarrant. The greatest part of effort is the mystery of intention. When we want to do something, we turn our hearts toward it, and eventually a path opens. Change itself is sudden, like harvest. It is preparing the ground that takes time. And a final poem by Isa. On a branch, floating down river, a cricket singing. On a branch, floating down river, a cricket singing. I end with this image because we are that cricket on a branch. Our fate is sealed, waiting to give us the envelope. But we still must do our work, for a cricket is singing and probably a lot of other things that crickets do. Each of us must return from the darkness, not once as if from a long voyage, but over and over as if waking up each morning. We return to do the work before us, our work. Maybe it is singing. Maybe it is organizing, writing letters, cooking, raising money, amplifying voices, meeting with lawmakers, voting. It's a million things. And today, this morning, this is mine. Thank you. And so we have a few minutes for questions or comments. I invite anything. I'll say first off, all the beautiful writing was John Tarrant. And again, the name of the book is The Light Inside the Dark. It's probably on your shelf if you have been at Appamada a while, but you may not have read it yet. Yeah, Lori.
I just want to thank you for this. It was so beautiful. Yeah, it's good to hear. Thank you.
Alex.
I just wanted to say that it's so beautiful too. A beautiful quilt, and not all of the beautiful writing was Tarrant.
John Tarrant.
I'll have to look that up. And yeah, there's so many things you said that I tried to like file away, but they just kept coming. I feel like this is like a fire hose of like wisdom and beauty and pain. And just spoke to, yeah, so much of life and my experience lately too, which we've talked about, but just thank you for offering all of that.
Yeah. Thank you, Ovid.
Oh, thank you.
Alex's dad.
That was my dad who passed earlier this year. And Raven has been, Robin has been a huge anchor for me.
Yeah, a funny thing, Alex and I have been spending time together online for 2.5 or 3 years. And we just met in person today, and we both live in Austin. COVID just keeps hanging around.
It really does.
Yeah, looking around, knowing, especially those of you who I know well, I just remember all of our losses, your losses, our losses, the losses. And yet we still can learn more about grief and how to be with our own grief, how to be with people who are grieving, and then also to trust that we'll come back.
Robin, it's Kathy. And I want to thank you. Your timing was impeccable. I just returned from my son-in-law's mother's funeral at 10 o'clock last night. And an hour ago, I received a phone call of a dear cousin that has died. The one thing that you said, that I picked out several things, but it's almost harder to be with the important people around the person that has died, and to be there for them and be willing to, because grief comes out in different ways, and being able to accept that and be with it. So thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. And you're right, I didn't include all the ways that I want things to be different, in addition to wanting my loved one to be alive. But I learned over and over again that, and Darcy has been a huge teacher, as well as Judy, who's in the square, she's right above you in the Brady Bunch. She's like looking down on you, Kathy, on my screen. That silence, presence, it's our practice. It's like this practice literally trains us to be with heartbreak and loss. And not just personal loss, the larger loss as well. And yet, I at least still have that human desire to want things to be different. You should cry more, you should do, whatever. And I just have to keep my mouth shut and just take care of those parts and just keep being present, keep showing up, keep being patient, and say, okay, we're just gonna do this until one of us keels over. It doesn't end. Grief doesn't end, it just changes. Hey, Kim.
It's interesting how we say that this practice prepares us, and yet then you say, I know nothing about it. And Anne, where's Anne? Anne had a little mishap yesterday with her car, and she said something like, "If it's okay, I hope it's okay." But you said you weren't mindful or something like that. It's an interesting kind of prepare. If you prepare yourself to be lost in the woods, then you know all these tricks to do to get back home. But it's a different kind of prepare, isn't it?
Yeah, it's more like a letting go. But even when we lose it because of a mishap with the car, some people just stay there and they believe whatever, blow up or frustration or whatever story they have about the other driver or whatever. I mean, anytime we can just come back and go, wow, who knows? That's not necessarily true. Who knows? That's huge. And I think one thing I always put in my talk, but I just go back to constantly is, our practice it's not actually to make things better. It's just the first precept is don't make things worse. And sometimes that's a really high bar. Just don't make it worse. And so that's kind of my mantra. Because my mantra used to be, make things better. Well, that actually makes things worse, as it turns out. So, Judy, I want to invite you, just, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you have been such a wonderful teacher to all of us for many years now on your grief journey. And I just want to bow to you and invite you to speak if you want to.
You know, I don't like to talk, but grief never ends. It changes you. It changes, you live into it. It's a journey, and love and loss go together. That's just how it is. And I'm grateful that I have this practice that I'm very dedicated to, because it brings me back to that realization that this is a journey and love and loss go together, and I will live into it until I live into my own death. I'm grateful to be here. Thank you.
I think that's it, unless anyone has a burning comment they would like to add or a question. Thank you so much for being here, and I want to give a particular just bow to you, Ellen, because you also have supported me from afar, and I am gonna circle back to you now that I'm emerging a little bit. So thank you for sharing your grief journey with me. And finally, Joel, who was like, I was like, what am I gonna do my Dharma talk about? And he's like, well, you've got to include the cat. Because we were meeting in the office the other morning, or I was in the office, you guys were there too, and the cat was glowering right above me the whole time. And I was like, yeah, that's right, because it's all connected. Yeah. There's evidence she's been on the floor and eaten, so that's good. I'll report back later. So she's having her own grief experience. Her one human being that she feels safe with is gone. So, you know, I'm not going to try to fix her. I'm just going to be present and also leave her some stinky food. Thank you so much for coming this morning and for being together. I really appreciate all of you.